Hello and welcome everyone to a very special episode of the WhyViz podcast, where designers have the space and time to tell the stories behind their projects. This episode is hosted by myself, Mark Barsoum, and I will take you through the process and story of creating my IndigiTrails infographic. Alright, let's get right into it. In Info 2673, we were asked to work with Leanne, the Executive Director of the Urban Society of Aboriginal Youth, USAY. USAY has been an influential non-profit organization in Calgary since 2001. They strive to provide essential programming and services to Calgary's Indigenous youth. Over recent years, they work closely with designers and engineers to create interactive products to create awareness and educate people about the history and culture of Indigenous people. We were asked to produce an infographic poster that tells the story of USAY and the specific product of theirs. The poster was addressed to a particular audience to help them understand the meaning behind the data and influence them to invest or fund the organization. To organize this project a little bit more, I wanted to separate it into a couple themes. Some that stood out to me were the choices behind the visual identity, versions that were scrapped along the way, and what we learned the most throughout the journey. These themes were standout components throughout the entire projects and were catalyst in keeping me organized and on task. To ensure that I made the right choices behind the visual identity and to make sure that it is a effective identity, I used key principles, protocols, and guidelines, as well as looking at past examples and good infographic ideas, all to respect the rights of Indigenous people to determine what knowledge and representation their culture deserves. All this was done by using multiple perspectives while gathering information, as well as considering context and making labor visible. Moving on to the versions that were scrapped along the way, there was many of those because we started off with content plans that had received feedback and had been adapted throughout many ideations, as well as many different ideations of the poster as we tile printed it 3 times and got different feedback from different people 3 different times. All of these ideations allowed us to scrap old posters and adapt them to create better and more effective posters moving forward. Jumping into the start of the project, we launched the project with Leanne. We had a Google Meet where we were able to discuss the project and the topics and purpose of the posters. All this was very helpful as it got our minds into the process and just got the ideas rolling. During the meet, we also got to look at some data and information that they had provided from USAY and IndigiTrails themselves. During this meeting, we also shared color palettes and visual guide systems that allowed us to create our visual identity for the poster. From color palettes to typography to hierarchy, it was all very important and a key to follow the protocols and principles that had been provided for us. So, by looking at past examples, good infographics, and trying to respect the rights of Indigenous people, I was able to adapt the color palette, layout, and considered the typography to create a more contrast and popping poster. During this, it was very important for me to keep an open mind and include multiple perspectives and consider context when creating this visual identity. Having or making a project for a culture that I'm not too familiar with is something that was challenging, but using these visual identity protocols, principles, and guidelines, I was able to stay on task and respect all aspects of the culture. Now, jumping into the versions that were scrapped along the way. There was many of those, like I said, because we had a lot of ideation during this project. We created our first draft with Adobe software, and we worked directly with Leanne to ensure that all the materials expressed the culture authenticity. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it for the meeting with Leanne, but I had received feedback from peers and Kelsey, as well as talk to peers about what Leanne had explained during the meeting. This helped me determine what aspects were missing from my project and what aspects could be improved. Moving forward, we had a second draft where we were able to talk with Kelsey and our peers and even improve that one even more. This one was also virtually on the Adobe softwares, and we were able to implement our layout and color palettes as well as hierarchy, infographics, and type. All this allowed us to visualize our ideas and ideate them even more. Finally, we get to our third draft. This draft was tile printed. We were asked to print it and bring it to class so that we can give feedback to our peers as well as receive feedback from them. This was probably the most helpful part of the project for me, as I work best in teams, and having people like having people doing the same project or similar projects allowed me to have that multiple perspective, and those different feedbacks helped massively. Finally, we had a final draft, which we also printed or tile printed, that we brought to receive feedback from Kelsey. This showed me many different problems, as the colors did not print as I expected, and the text might have been too big. So there was a lot of different aspects that had to be seen in person to make change to. And finally, we had created our final poster, which we printed in 18 by 24. And I was honestly very impressed with mine, as I did not expect it to come out as good as it is. So, finally, what I had learned from this journey. So, to start off the project, it was very hard for me to get my head around the topic. So, what I learned the most is that research is very important. Research allows people to understand the topic that they are talking about, which helps massively in creating a visual identity and implementing the right content. Another thing was the color when printing. So that is something that messed me up massively, as I did not expect the colors to come out such a different way than on the visual or on the virtual Adobe softwares. This is something that I need to improve in the future, and a way of doing that is to ideate more and print even more. So by not having printed the pictures before, I was not able to see how they looked, and in the final poster, they came out a lot darker than I expected. Finally, during this process, I saw how important ideation and feedback is. It was something that I avoided in the past because it made me nervous and anxious what people thought of my projects. That being said, this project changed that mindset completely, because after getting feedback and ideating my project more and more, I saw the benefits and improvement in my project. This is something that I will keep doing in the future and will try and keep improving the more I work as a designer. Unfortunately, this is all the time that we have for today. I hope you all enjoyed listening to my story on this project. And before I sign off, I wanted to give a quick shout out and thanks to all of our listeners out there. We truly appreciate your support, and we hope that you found today's episode insightful and helpful. As always, we welcome your feedback and suggestions for future topics and episodes. So feel free to reach out to us via our website or social media channels, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so that you never miss an episode. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.